Hey guys, tonight we're sliding quietly into the foggy streets of Victorian England, the only place where you could be arrested for impersonating a ghost, eating a bun in an improper manner, or keeping a pig at the wrong address. Tonight, it's all about the weirdest crimes and the even weirder ways people got themselves locked up. Back when top hats were tall, morals were taller, and the air was thick with the scent of coal smoke, pickled onions, and pure existential dread. So before you get comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment telling me what's the weirdest rule you've ever broken, and what time it is where you are. I have a sneaking suspicion it's somewhere between should be asleep and too late to turn back now. Now, dim those gas lamps, switch on a fan for that soft white noise and get comfortable. But let's pause for a moment. Have you ever wondered what counted as a crime in Victorian England? Could you really be fined for flying a kite on a Sunday? What happens if you whistle in the street after 10 p.m? Is there a correct way to eat a cucumber sandwich? And how many years in prison do you get for doing it wrong? Would you survive a police raid for suspicious loafing? Or would your career be tragically cut short by a scandal involving your umbrella? And, most crucially, could you spend a single night in a world where wearing the wrong hat in the wrong place might land you in jail for disturbing the peace of society? Congratulations! You've just woken up in the year 1852. You're in London, your shoes are already damp, you don't know the laws, and you're probably already guilty of at least 3 misdemeanors just by existing. Good luck. There's loafing. And then there's suspicious loafing. The kind where standing in one spot too long means you're either up to something, or simply not up to enough. In Victorian England, doing nothing at all could attract the full force of the law. So tonight, you're loitering outside a bakery, pretending you've lost your wallet, but really you're just trying to figure out if it's illegal to stand still and think about cheese. It's early evening, and the fog is curling low over the cobblestones like a cat looking for trouble. The gas lamps flicker and spit, casting shadows that move more than the people do. The scent of baking bread drifts from the shop window. A smell so warm and inviting it feels borderline criminal in a city where warmth itself often comes with a surcharge. Your stomach rumbles loudly enough that a passing woman clutches her handbag. The trouble with loafing, especially the suspicious kind, is that the Victorian police force, newly professionalised and eager to justify their shiny buttons, have made it their mission to spot people like you. Not thieves in action, mind you. Not burglars mid-burglary. Just people who look like they might commit a crime one day if they ever got around to it. Standing too still is practically an open confession. You try to look busy. You pat your coat pockets as if searching for something. You examine the bakery's sign, pretending to admire the calligraphy when in truth you can't even tell if it says best crusts in London or beast crusts in London. You glance up the street in a way you hope reads as waiting for a friend, rather than waiting for the shopkeeper to drop dead so I can run off with the scones. Then he appears, the constable. He's broad, shiny helmeted, and walking with the slow inevitability of a man who will definitely ruin your evening. His eyes narrow. Yours attempt the innocent gaze of someone who has never even heard of crime, let alone considered dabbling in it. "What's your business here?" he asks. A simple enough question, but one that Victorian society has made nearly impossible to answer without implicating yourself. If you say you're just standing here, you're loitering. If you say waiting for a friend, they'll want to know the friend's name, occupation, hat size, and current address. If you say you're admiring the bread, that's intent to purchase, meaning if you don't buy, you're suspicious again. You mumble something about enjoying the evening air, which is only half a lie. The other half of the air is coal smoke and a mysterious cabbage smell drifting from somewhere behind the butcher's. Modern comparison break. Think about standing outside a coffee shop today, waiting for someone who's late. You scroll on your phone. No one bothers you. Now take away the phone, the coffee, and the cultural understanding that waiting is a thing people sometimes do. What's left is you, standing in a cloud of suspicion, one raised eyebrow away from the magistrate's bench. You decide movement is the safest option. In Victorian England, walking briskly suggested purpose. Too brisk, and you looked like you were running from a crime scene. Too slow, and you were back to loafing. You attempt the delicate in-between, a purposeful meander. The constable watches, clearly debating whether a man can meander purposefully at all. You pass other potential loafers, a boy lingering by a lamppost, a man staring into a puddle as if waiting for it to blink back. They give you the subtle nod of fellow suspects. You are brothers in inactivity, united by the unshakable belief that it shouldn't be illegal to take your time deciding where to put your feet next. Eventually, the constable loses interest. Perhaps he decides you're not casing the bakery after all, just an unusually motionless enthusiast of bread-based aromas. You walk on, the smell of fresh loaves fading into the damp night air, and promise yourself that next time, you'll either buy the bun immediately or at least carry a newspaper to wave around like a license to stand still. Because in Victorian England, you don't need to commit a crime to be treated like a criminal, you just need to look like you're thinking about it. And nothing says up to no good quite like standing quietly, minding your own business, and letting your mind wander to cheese. Bread is bread, right? Wrong. In 1869, you could be fined for eating a hot cross bun in a lewd or riotous manner. Welcome to a world where even breakfast can be a criminal offence. You try to eat quietly, but the bun is too soft, the street is too crowded, and suddenly you're a public menace with a mouthful of crumbs. Let's set the stage. It's a brisk Victorian morning. Your boots click against the damp cobblestones, the air smells of coal smoke and boiled cabbage, and your breath turns white in the chill. You spot it, a little bakery with its door propped open, warm air spilling out like a hug you have to pay for. In the window, a neat row of hot cross buns, golden brown with a perfect white cross, each one practically humming with the promise of raisins and spice. You've been awake for 3 hours already, and your stomach is staging a minor uprising. You hand over a penny, clutch the bun like a treasure, and step outside. That's when the danger begins. You take your first bite and, oh no, the bun is soft. Too soft. The sugar glaze sticks to your lips, and the raisins, still warm, burst with a sweetness that borders on the scandalous. You close your eyes for half a second, savouring it, and in that moment, you've crossed the invisible line between innocent consumption and display of excessive gustatory pleasure in a public setting. Here's the thing about Victorian England. Public morality was serious business. It wasn't enough to avoid drunken brawls or public indecency. You also had to mind your crumb behaviour. Eating in a riotous manner could mean eating too quickly, laughing with your mouth full, gesturing with a half-eaten bun, or, God forbid, sharing it with someone of the opposite sex without the proper chaperone. Eating lewdly was even worse, though no two people seemed to agree on what it meant. Was it biting too slowly? Making eye contact while chewing? Getting icing sugar on your nose? The law didn't say. Which meant anyone, shopkeeper, constable, passing moral crusader, could decide for you. And here comes one now. A matron in a bonnet stops dead in her tracks, eyes locked on the bun in your hand like it's a live weapon. She tuts loudly. A man across the street looks over. Suddenly, you're at the centre of an impromptu morality play. The villain in Act 1, the improperly consumed confection. You try to recover. You take a dainty bite, lowering your gaze to the cobblestones like a penitent schoolboy. But the bun is too good. It's warm, spiced, slightly sticky. A raisin escapes and rolls down your sleeve. You catch it, instinctively, and pop it back into your mouth. Gasps. Somewhere, a child points. Now imagine this in modern terms. Picture eating a croissant in 2025 and having a police officer fine you because you look too into it, or biting into a donut and being cited for deliberate display of jelly. That was Victorian England, where even your breakfast could be a moral battleground. The constable appears, as they always do, with notebook in hand. He clears his throat. "We've had a complaint," he says, glancing at the bun like it might lunge at him. You stammer something about being hungry. He asks you to demonstrate how you've been eating it, and you immediately realise there is no way to eat a bun under police observation without looking at least mildly guilty. He warns you this time and tells you to consume with propriety. You nod solemnly, as if you've just been given the terms of a delicate peace treaty. The matron walks away victorious, her bonnet bobbing in moral satisfaction. You finish the bun in 3 furtive bites, back turned to the street, like a man committing a lesser sin behind a stable. The warmth lingers, but so does the lesson. In Victorian England, pleasure is to be enjoyed in private, preferably with the curtains drawn and witnesses discouraged, because here, even a simple hot cross bun could get you crossed with the law. It's 10:01 p.m. You're whistling a tune because it calms your nerves. Suddenly, a constable leaps from the shadows, notebook in hand, ready to charge you with disturbing the public peace by means of tuneful airs after curfew. You try to explain it was only Greensleeves. Too late, you're headed to the station. It's a damp Victorian night, the kind where fog turns the gaslight into a pale yellow halo, and every step echoes in the emptiness. The streets are mostly deserted, respectable people are tucked away indoors, and the less respectable ones are busy making sure they aren't caught. You walk quickly, your boots splashing in shallow puddles, and before you even realize it, you're quietly whistling. It's not loud, it's not jaunty, just a low little melody to keep yourself company in the darkness. Unfortunately for you, the law doesn't care about volume or intent. In mid-19th century cities, nighttime whistling was seen as deeply suspicious. It was the kind of thing burglars did to signal each other, or drunkards did to announce their presence, or bored young men did to irritate their elders. Even if your only criminal activity is having a tune stuck in your head, to the Victorian constabulary you've just broadcast a confession. You don't hear the constable at first. The man's trained for this, moving silently until the exact moment he steps into the pool of light beside you. Eyes narrowed, notebook at the ready. "Evenin'," he says in the slow, dangerous tone of someone who already suspects you of everything short of treason. "What's all this about, then?" You freeze, bunting the melody into an awkward cough. "Just a song, you say?" He glances around the empty street. "Songs are for daylight, sir." He starts writing. The scratching of his pencil sounds like a saw against your good name. Here's the thing. Victorians liked their nights quiet. In the poorer districts, people lived in rooms so cramped that sleep was already a fragile, contested luxury. In the wealthier neighbourhoods, silence was a symbol of control and order. A man whistling in the street after 10, that was noise, unpredictability, and possibly an entire conspiracy. You attempt the innocent citizen defence. You explain that you weren't whistling at anyone, you weren't whistling to anyone, and you certainly weren't whistling in a way that could be mistaken for an encoded message. He doesn't buy it. For all he knows, you've just signalled to your gang of fellow criminals to burgle the bakery 3 streets over. Let's put this in modern terms. Imagine humming quietly to yourself in a train station and being instantly detained, because humming is a known tactic of jewel thieves. That's Victorian logic. Any harmless behaviour could be rebranded as criminal if it happened at the wrong hour. The constable lectures you on the sanctity of the evening quiet, on how decent folk don't go about making a racket in the Queen's streets after hours. You nod dutifully, resisting the urge to point out that Greensleeves is hardly a banger. He warns you that next time it will mean a night in the cells, where you can hum all you like for an audience of drunks and pickpockets. When he finally lets you go, you walk away in silence, ears still burning from the encounter. The street feels different now. Colder, emptier. As though the city itself has ears and will report you if you so much as tap your fingers on your coat. You arrive home and make yourself a cup of weak tea, still replaying the absurdity of it all. In the safety of your tiny rented room, you let the tune back out in a whisper-soft whistle. No one hears. No one charges you. And in that moment, it feels like victory. Because in Victorian England, survival often meant mastering the art of not attracting attention, especially if that attention was for something as criminally suspicious as a song in the dark. In Victorian London, pigs are family, but only if you keep them at the right address. If your pig lives at 32B but your licence says 32A, you're guilty of unlawful swine habitation. Now you're pleading with the local magistrate that your pig can't read house numbers. It's a drizzly Tuesday morning, and you're outside in your wool coat, which smells faintly of hay and regret. Your pig, Gertrude, a fine, pink specimen with a suspicious glint in her eye, is rooting around in the gutter for something edible. You've kept her for years without incident. She's a companion, a source of the occasional pork chop, and frankly better company than most of your neighbours. But then came the letter. A summons. An official one, with your name, your address, and an accusation that reads like the setup to a bad joke. Willful keeping of a pig at an address not stated in the licence. You read it 3 times before realising the problem. Gertrude's sty is in the back garden of 32B, your cousin's place, while you are licensed for 32A. It's a difference of about 8 feet. Unfortunately, in the eyes of Victorian law, it's the moral equivalent of running an international smuggling operation. You try to explain this to the constable who arrives, notebook in hand. She's polite, mostly quiet, except when she sees cabbages, and she doesn't wander far. The constable, who clearly went into policing to fight more glamorous crimes, sighs and starts writing anyway. Let's talk about why this is a problem. In mid-19th century London, pigs were both prized and policed. They were walking larders, garbage disposals, and sometimes emergency income. But they were also, according to the respectable classes, dirty, smelly, and prone to bringing undesirable elements into the neighbourhood. So the city passed regulations. You could have your pig, but you needed a licence, and the licence was for a specific address. This was supposedly to control disease and keep track of livestock, but in practice it mostly generated petty fines and court appearances. You picture Gertrude in the dock beside you, wearing a little bonnet for respectability. You imagine the magistrate gravely asking if she understands the charges. You try not to laugh. Magistrates hate that. Instead, you gather your defence. Gertrude has no concept of street numbers. She is, as far as you can tell, functionally illiterate. She went where the food scraps were better, and you, foolish human, let her. In modern terms, this is like getting arrested because your cat prefers to nap at your neighbour's house, or your Roomba crossed the hallway without proper zoning approval. The absurdity doesn't make the law any less enforceable. You arrive at the magistrate's court, a low-ceilinged room that smells of ink, dust and moral judgment. The clerk reads the charge aloud. The spectators murmur. Somewhere in the back, a man laughs, then pretends to cough. You explain in detail the situation. You point out that Gertrude's daily commute between 32A and 32B involves exactly 0 public danger, unless you count her occasional cabbage thefts. The magistrate frowns, shuffles papers, and finally delivers his verdict. A small fine, payable immediately, and a stern warning to keep your pig in its properly licensed premises. You nod obediently, knowing full well that Gertrude will be back at 32 by the moment she smells the neighbour's better potato peelings. That night, you return home with your porcine outlaw. She trots ahead of you, blissfully unaware that she's now a documented offender. You glance up and down the street before ushering her through your own gate, as if you're smuggling contraband past a border patrol. In Victorian London, survival meant knowing the rules, not because they made sense, but because the smallest mistake could land you in court. And sometimes, all it took to be on the wrong side of the law was a pig with a preference for the wrong front door. It's raining, of course. You open your umbrella with a flourish, only to discover you've committed umbrella nuisance, a serious charge if your umbrella splashes mud onto a passing lady's petticoat. You ponder a life behind bars, sentenced for weather-based mischief. The rain in Victorian London doesn't just fall. It slants, it spits, it drips down the back of your neck with the determination of a tax collector. The cobblestones are slick with a combination of water, horse leavings, and whatever mysterious fluids seep out of the markets after dark. In short, it's a perfect umbrella day. Your umbrella, however, is not a sleek modern contraption. It's a hulking, cane-handled beast that requires 2 hands and a minor engineering degree to open. You give it a sharp flick. It springs open with a sound like a startled bat, and in doing so sends a fine arc of muddy street water directly onto the immaculate petticoat of a passing lady. This is bad. Very bad. Because in the court of Victorian public opinion, there is no faster route to social and legal ruin than besmirching the garments of a respectable woman. She freezes, looks down at the damage, and draws in a sharp breath that could summon a constable from 3 streets away. And she does. The constable arrives, helmet gleaming, notebook in hand. He has the air of a man who has seen every crime London has to offer, from petty theft to public drunkenness, but still reserves a special kind of disdain for umbrella offenders. Umbrella nuisance, he writes with the solemnity of a murder charge. Willful and careless deployment in public thoroughfare, resulting in soiling of garments. You stammer something about the weather. But in Victorian London, the rain is not an excuse. It is an opportunity for proper conduct. Umbrellas are to be handled delicately, like swords in a crowded ballroom. They must be raised without splashing, angled to avoid collision, and furled with a precision that would impress a Royal Navy drill master. Modern comparison break. Imagine opening a door in 2025 and accidentally bumping someone with it, only for the police to arrive, cite you for reckless hinge operation, and fine you enough to cover their coffee budget for the month. That's the Victorian umbrella standard. The constable asks if you've had prior infractions. You haven't, but you suspect your umbrella has. It's a hand-me-down, slightly bent on one side, prone to catching in sudden gusts and flipping inside out in a way that could decapitate a small child. You consider your defence. Perhaps you can argue self-defence against the weather, but in this city, a wet coat is preferable to a dirty petticoat, and your umbrella has chosen its victim poorly. The lady, now joined by two friends, is giving testimony with the gravity of a courtroom drama. Words like outrageous and disrespectful float through the damp air. The constable lets you off with a warning, but it's not without cost. Your pride is thoroughly soaked, along with the hem of your trousers. You resolve to practice more restrained umbrella manoeuvres, a slow, careful unfurl, a minimal arc of motion, perhaps even a verbal warning to those nearby. As you continue on your way, the rain picks up. You hold the umbrella closer to your chest, shielding not just yourself but your legal record. You pass other pedestrians, some braving the elements without protection, others wielding umbrellas like dueling foils, their tips weaving dangerously close to each other's hats. The moral becomes clear. In Victorian London, the umbrella is less a shield from the rain and more a test of your ability to coexist politely in public space. One wrong move, one errant drop of mud, and you're not just a person caught in a storm, you're a walking, dripping scandal. So, you grip the handle tighter, angle the canopy just so, and walk on, determined to survive both the weather and the unwritten code of umbrella etiquette. Because here, keeping dry is easy. Keeping out of trouble is the real challenge. What could be more innocent than a child flying a kite? In Victorian England, felony, apparently. The Lord's Day Observance Act makes it illegal, and here you are, wrestling a bit of string and a paper diamond, while the vicar looks on in horror. It's a bright Sunday afternoon, the kind that feels like it ought to be filled with simple pleasures, children laughing, fresh laundry drying on lines, and the satisfying tug of a kite catching the breeze. You've fashioned yours from scraps, a wooden cross frame, brown paper stiffened with flour paste, and a tail made from knotted rags. It's a thing of beauty, or at least a thing of mild aerodynamic competence. The wind is perfect. You launch it with a confident flick of your wrists, and up it goes, wobbling at first, then catching steady. You grin like a fool, but down on the ground, not everyone shares your joy. Across the green, the vicar has stopped mid-conversation, his eyes fixed on your illicit aerial display. He looks the way one might look upon witnessing a public duel in the vegetable aisle. Here's the problem. The Lord's Day Observance Act wasn't just about keeping shops closed on Sundays. It was about keeping you, and everyone else, properly focused on the solemnity of the Sabbath. Anything that smacked of amusement rather than piety was frowned upon, and in many places, outright forbidden. Kite flying was considered a particularly offensive form of Sabbath breaking, too visible, too joyous, too likely to inspire others to join in. The vicar's lips press into a line so thin it could slice bread. You reel the kite in a little, trying to make it look less like unholy fun and more like, well, you're not sure. Religious string management? But it's no use. A boy's laughter drifts over from where he's watching, and you've now corrupted a minor with your flagrant breeziness. It's not long before the constable arrives, trundling across the grass in his heavy boots. His helmet catches the sunlight in a way that feels distinctly judgmental. "What's all this, then?" he asks, though he clearly already knows. You attempt a defence. It's for educational purposes, you say. Studying wind patterns. The constable raises an eyebrow. On the Lord's Day, you consider offering the theological argument that perhaps God made the wind for kites. But something tells you this won't land well in court. Instead, you begin reeling in the kite, hoping submission might earn you mercy. In modern terms, this is like being arrested for playing frisbee in the park on a Sunday afternoon because someone decided frisbee was an affront to moral order. The absurdity is almost funny, except that the constable is already pulling out his notebook. He lectures you on the importance of setting a proper example, on the dangers of idleness, and on how your kite's carefree fluttering is a public disturbance of the spiritual atmosphere. You nod solemnly, all the while imagining your kite rotting away in the evidence locker. By now, a small crowd has gathered. Some look scandalized, others look envious. A few children, emboldened by your rebellion, have produced scraps of string and are eyeing their own makeshift kites. The constable spots them and sighs heavily. It's going to be a long afternoon for him. In the end, you're given a warning, but only after promising to keep your kite grounded on Sundays. You tuck it under your arm, feeling a bit like a criminal carrying the weapon from a foiled heist. The wind still tugs at the paper, whispering its longing to be free. As you walk home, you realise something important. In Victorian England, joy had a timetable, and stepping outside of it, no matter how innocently, could put you on the wrong side of the law. And so, for the sake of peace, you resign yourself to flying your kite only on weekdays, when its harmless dance in the sky won't be mistaken for a dangerous act of defiance. White sheet, spooky noises, harmless prank, except you've just committed personation of a spirit, a real arrestable offence. Your neighbours are in uproar, and you're being dragged off for causing terror by means of supernatural imitation. The afterlife, it turns out, is heavily policed. It all starts as a joke. You're bored, the night is foggy, and there's an old bedsheet hanging on the washing line. Somewhere between folding the laundry and putting the kettle on, you get the idea. Drape it over your head, shuffle around the street corner, and make the occasional woo noise. You're not trying to summon Beelzebub, you just want to see if old Mr. Hayworth will drop his walking stick in fright. But Victorian England is in the grip of a ghost obsession. Spiritualism is booming, seances are fashionable, and half the city seems convinced their dead aunt is trying to contact them via the parlour curtains. Against this backdrop, pretending to be a ghost isn't just mischief, it's treated as a deliberate act of fraud or public menace. The newspapers have been full of ghost scare reports, men in white cloaks jumping out at women, pranksters hiding in churchyards, and the occasional rogue cow draped in a sheet. Some of these encounters have ended in genuine injury or death. The authorities are not amused. You shuffle along the pavement, keeping your arms stiff for maximum spectral effect. A small crowd forms. Some giggle nervously. Others cross themselves. One woman lets out a shriek that could shatter glass and promptly faints against a lamppost. That's when the shouting starts. A group of men rush forward, led by the local constable, who looks like he's been waiting his whole career for this moment. "Got you, you blasted apparition!" he cries, grabbing you firmly by the arm. The sheet slips, revealing your decidedly non-ghostly face. The crowd gasps. A child points. The constable starts scribbling in his notebook with righteous fury. You try to explain. "It was just a bit of fun. No harm done." But the constable isn't having it. Under the Vagrancy Act, pretending to be a ghost is a specific, punishable offence, lumped in with fortune-telling, begging, and other forms of public mischief. The logic is that by impersonating a spirit, you are either attempting to commit fraud by convincing people you can summon the dead, or causing a breach of the peace through fright. In modern terms, this would be like getting arrested for wearing a cheap werewolf mask on Halloween because someone decided you were knowingly inducing mass hysteria. You're marched to the police station, the crowd trailing behind like you're a travelling sideshow. The sergeant at the desk raises an eyebrow when the constable announces, "Charge, personation of a spirit." He writes it down anyway, though you notice the corners of his mouth twitching. In the holding cell, you meet two other ghosts, a chimney sweep who thought it would be funny to haunt the tavern where his ex-girlfriend works, and a man who got drunk, fell into a laundry basket, and emerged wearing a sheet entirely by accident. You trade stories while the constable occasionally peers in to make sure you're not vanishing through the walls. When your case reaches the magistrate, you plead guilty in the hope of leniency. He lectures you for several minutes on the dangers of meddling with the public's spiritual well-being and the importance of not frightening ladies, children, or those of a nervous disposition. You nod solemnly and promise never to ghost again, in any sense of the word. You leave the court lighter in the pocket from the fine but richer in knowledge. In Victorian England, the line between supernatural entertainment and criminal offence is perilously thin. And while the afterlife might be mysterious, the law about impersonating it is perfectly clear. Keep your sheet where it belongs, or be prepared to spend the night somewhere much less haunted, but far more uncomfortable. You thought it was fine to let your donkey graze by the curb, but a passing official informs you it's a breach of the Metropolitan Streets Act. Now you and your donkey are both considered obstructions of the Queen's Highway. It's late morning in Victorian London, and the city is a chaos of clattering hooves, rattling cartwheels, and the occasional shout of, "Mind the muck." You've been walking your donkey, Harold, a placid, long-eared creature with a habit of stopping to sniff anything that smells vaguely edible, when you decide to pause outside a shop. There's a patch of grass poking through between the cobblestones near the curb, and Harold, clearly feeling lucky, lowers his head to graze. That's when the trouble begins. From across the street, a man in an official-looking coat spots you. He moves with the grim determination of someone who's about to quote the law in great detail. Within moments, he's standing in front of you, notebook out, pen poised, eyes on Harold as if he's just caught a jewel thief mid-heist. "Do you have a license to occupy this part of the Queen's Highway?" he asks. You stare at him. You have no idea what he's talking about, and neither does Harold, who is still chewing happily. The official explains, in the tone of someone delivering a sermon on sin, that under the Metropolitan Streets Act, no person or donkey may obstruct the thoroughfare. Grazing counts as an obstruction. Standing still counts as an obstruction. In fact, breathing too purposefully in the wrong place might also count as an obstruction if someone in authority is in a bad mood. You point out that Harold is hardly blocking the road, he's practically hugging the curb. The official shakes his head. "It's the principle of the matter," he says, as though this clears everything up. "Here's the thing about Victorian city regulations. They weren't just about keeping traffic moving. They were about maintaining order, propriety, and the delicate illusion that London was a city of refinement rather than an ongoing street battle between mud, manure, and humanity. A donkey chewing grass where it shouldn't? That was a crack in the facade, a sign that chaos might be winning." The official starts writing. You imagine the charge. Willfully allowing an ungulate to impede the Queen's subjects during lawful passage. It sounds like something that ought to be punishable by a polite warning at most. But in this city, it could mean a fine, a court appearance, or both. In modern terms, this would be like parking your bicycle slightly outside the rack and having a police officer issue you a ticket for reckless stationary positioning. You try to move Harold along, but he plants his hooves. Donkeys, you remember too late, are masters of passive resistance. The official watches with barely concealed satisfaction, no doubt adding failure to control animal to your list of offences. Eventually, Harold relents, perhaps sensing the tension, and you lead him away. The official, however, follows long enough to ensure you're truly gone from his jurisdiction. You can almost hear him muttering about civic duty. By the time you reach your destination, you're fuming. It's not just the fine that bothers you, it's the absurdity of it. Harold wasn't hurting anyone. In fact, his presence was probably the most charming thing on that street all day. But in Victorian London, charm wasn't a legal defence. That evening, as Harold dozes in his stable, you can't help but glance at him with a new sense of solidarity. You've both learned the same lesson. In the eyes of the law, the Queen's Highway is sacred ground. Step or graze out of line, and you'll find yourself, hooves or not, in trouble. Because here, even a humble donkey could become a public enemy, simply by enjoying a bit of grass in the wrong place at the wrong time. Cold air, soot, and questionable handkerchief hygiene means sneezing is inevitable. But sneeze too loudly in church, and you'll be accused of willful interruption of worship. Your only defence: pleading seasonal allergies. It's a crisp Victorian Sunday morning. the kind where the air feels like it's been filtered through a coal scuttle. You've made your way to church, boots squeaking faintly on the damp flagstones, and found a seat halfway down the aisle, close enough to look devout, far enough to make a quiet exit if the sermon drags on. The building is cold, the sort of cold that seeps into your bones, and the smell of damp wool and human breath hangs thick in the air. The vicar begins his sermon, voice echoing in the high, vaulted ceiling, every syllable carrying the weight of divine authority. You sit quietly, trying to focus, but there's a tickle in your nose. At first, you think you can ignore it. You clamp your jaw shut, take shallow breaths, and focus on the stained glass. But the tickle grows. You try the silent sneeze method, pressing your upper lip in hopes of containing the blast, but it's no use. The sneeze detonates like a cannon shot. Heads turn. The vicar pauses mid-sentence, blinking slowly as though you've just shouted heresy. Somewhere in the pew behind you, an elderly woman clutches her chest. You murmur an apology, but it's too late. The sanctity of the service has been shattered. In Victorian society, church wasn't just a religious obligation, it was a public performance of respectability. Every movement was watched, every sound judged, and while sneezing wasn't inherently sinful, doing it loudly enough to drown out a portion of the sermon could be seen as willful interruption. That's an actual charge, punishable by fine or even removal from the premises. The assumption was that you'd done it on purpose, perhaps as a form of protest against the preacher's theological stance on Methodism, or worse, his views on hymn tempo. You try to explain to the church warden that it's just the soot in the air. After all, in this city, every breath is like inhaling the inside of a chimney. He doesn't look convinced. You're mentally preparing your defense in court. Your worship. My only crime is possessing a nose that functions under adverse conditions. Here's the modern comparison. Imagine coughing in a cinema and being immediately escorted out for sabotaging the emotional integrity of the third act. That's the level of seriousness we're dealing with here. The rest of the congregation gives you side-eye for the remainder of the service. Every time you reach for your handkerchief, a grim scrap of fabric that's seen better centuries, people stiffen. You do your best to sit perfectly still, but inevitably, the coal smoke air triggers another sneeze. This one you stifle into your handkerchief, which makes a noise like a mouse being stepped on. Still, a man 3 pews up glances over his shoulder with the disapproval of someone who's never experienced nasal congestion. By the time the final hymn is sung, you're sweating from the effort of suppressing your body's natural functions. Outside, the church warden gives you a parting warning. Any further disturbances, and we'll be obliged to speak to the magistrate. You nod gravely, feeling as though you've been put on some sort of divine probation. On the walk home, you reflect on the absurdity. Sneezing is involuntary. It's universal, and yet, in Victorian England, it could land you in trouble if it occurred in the wrong place, at the wrong volume, or, heaven forbid, at the wrong point in the sermon. You make a mental note to carry a muffler next Sunday, so you can bury your face and muffle any nasal explosions. Because here, even a sneeze can be a social and legal offence. And the last thing you want is to become the talk of the parish, as that person who sneezed during the reading from Corinthians. Your goat's gone rogue and is wandering the market square, but apparently she too can be arrested for unaccompanied meandering. You try to bribe her with a turnip, but it's too late. The goat is cuffed. It starts innocently enough. You've brought your goat, Matilda, a gentle creature with eyes that suggest she's plotting something, to the market. She's tethered to a post while you haggle over onions, but the knot you tied was less secure animal restraint and more gentle suggestion. One distracted glance at a stall selling cabbages, and she's gone, ambling into the open square with the serene confidence of someone who has never read the Metropolitan Streets Act. By the time you spot her, Matilda has worked her way to the pie seller's stall, where she's inspecting the wares with a professional air. A crowd has gathered. Some laugh. Others mutter about the dangers of livestock at liberty. Then the constable appears, moving with the same grim determination as if he were approaching a bank robber. "Is this your goat?" he asks, though the answer is obvious. Matilda, ever helpful, lets out a loud bleat that echoes off the stone walls. The constable informs you that she's in violation of public order by loitering without lawful purpose. The law, it turns out, does not distinguish between humans and goats when it comes to obstructing the Queen's highway. In fact, unaccompanied livestock are considered a serious hazard, prone to disrupting traffic, damaging goods, or, in Matilda's case, making unsolicited inquiries about baked goods. You try the turnip bribe. Matilda takes it, chews slowly, and stays exactly where she is. The constable is unimpressed. "She'll have to come with me," he says, producing a rope. You watch in disbelief as your goat is effectively taken into custody. Her small hooves clip-clopping across the cobblestones as the crowd follows. Here's the modern comparison. Imagine your dog slips its lead, wanders into a coffee shop, and is frog-marched out by a police officer citing reckless latte interference. That's the level of seriousness here. At the station, you discover there's an actual holding area for impounded animals, a grim, straw-floored space where Matilda joins a small pony, 2 chickens, and what appears to be a particularly disgruntled sheep. The sergeant behind the desk takes your name and records the incident with an expression that suggests this is not the weirdest paperwork he's done today. While you wait for her release, you're lectured on proper livestock management. It's all very official. Animals must be secured at all times, tethered in an approved location, and never, under any circumstances, allowed to wander without direct supervision. The fact that Matilda merely strolled a few feet to browse the market is, apparently, irrelevant. The law is the law. You pay the fine, which is insultingly high for an offence committed by a creature who can't read and collect your goat. She trots beside you on the way home, looking smug, as if her little adventure was worth every penny of your penalty. The absurdity of it all lingers. Matilda is no menace. She's practically a civic treasure. But in Victorian England, charm isn't a legal defence, and livestock had no more right to loiter than a pickpocket or street performer. Back home, you double knot her tether, wondering if she's already planning her next foray into criminal activity. Because if there's one thing Victorian law makes clear, it's that even the most innocent-looking goat can be treated as a hardened offender. Hoofprints and all, if she dares to stand in the wrong place at the wrong time. Victorian hats are fashion statements, but don't go too wide. Obstruction of view by means of ostentatious headwear is a misdemeanour, and the judge is not amused by your tragic millinery choices. You knew the hat was a risk the moment you put it on. It wasn't just large, it was architectural. The brim stretched so far in every direction you could probably use it as a dinner table for 6. But in your defence, that's exactly what the fashion magazines of the day told you to do. Go big, go dramatic, let your headwear announce your presence before you actually arrive. The trouble begins at the theatre. You've taken your seat in the stalls for an evening performance of some deeply respectable play, likely involving a lot of staring into the distance and sighing. You're settling in when you notice whispers from the row behind. Then the polite coughs begin, followed by a not-so-polite tap on your shoulder. "Excuse me," says a voice that drips with restrained fury. "We can't see anything past that thing." You glance back to see 2 ladies craning their necks at dangerous angles, like they're trying to watch the performance through a keyhole. You tilt your hat forward in what you think is a gesture of courtesy, but this only blocks the view of the people in front of you, who now turn to glare. In Victorian society, public entertainment was a communal experience, and obstructing someone's view was considered a breach of etiquette so grave it sometimes edged into the legal realm. Theatres, music halls, and lecture halls all had rules, some formal, some enforced by sheer social pressure, against excessive headwear, and in certain municipalities, these rules were written into bylaws, complete with fines for repeat offenders. The usher arrives. He's small, stern, and looks as though he's had this conversation 100 times already tonight. "I'm afraid that hat exceeds acceptable dimensions," he says, producing a small wooden ruler from his pocket. "The limit is 24. In modern terms, it's like being told your popcorn bucket at the cinema is too big and poses a public safety risk. You offer to remove the hat, but here's the catch. It's so elaborately pinned into your hair that detaching it would take half an hour, several hairpins, and possibly divine intervention." The usher shakes his head. "Regulations are regulations." You're escorted to the lobby, where a constable, apparently on standby for exactly this kind of offence, takes your details. The charge? Obstruction of view by ostentatious headwear. The fine is steep, and there's talk of banning you from the theatre unless you agree to wear moderate millinery in future. You sign the paperwork, vowing never again to let vanity put you on the wrong side of the law. As you step back out into the street, the night air catches the brim and nearly carries you into oncoming traffic. Passers-by stare, some in admiration, others in open disbelief. You realise the hat has achieved exactly what you wanted. It's made you unforgettable. Unfortunately, it's also made you unforgettable to the local magistrate. Back home, you hang the hat on the wall. It's too beautiful to discard, too notorious to wear again in public. Perhaps it will live out its days as a conversation piece, a relic of your brief but dazzling career as a millinery outlaw. In Victorian England, fashion could elevate you or land you in legal trouble. And while your head may be free of that spectacular brim, your name now lives forever in the annals of questionable fashion crimes. You sit in the park with your sandwich, hoping for peace. But is it legal to eat it while reclining? Can you spread too much butter? Sandwich conduct unbecoming is a charge that will haunt your picnic forever. It's a mild summer afternoon in Victorian London, the kind where the park feels like a stage, and everyone in it is part of an elaborate production of look how respectable we all are. You've found yourself a pleasant bench under a chestnut tree, unwrapped your neatly wrapped parcel, and revealed the crown jewel of genteel snacking. The cucumber sandwich. You take in the view, parasols bobbing along the gravel paths, children in stiff white frocks chasing hoops, and the faint strains of a brass band playing something both cheery and slightly melancholic. It's the perfect setting for a quiet bite. But here's the problem. Victorian picnicking wasn't the free-form, eat-how-you-like affair you might imagine. It was governed by invisible but ironclad rules, and violating those rules, especially in public view, could easily become a social or even legal issue. You shift into a comfortable recline, one ankle over the other, sandwich in hand. That's when the woman on the next bench gasps. Not at the sandwich itself, but at how you're holding it. In polite society, cucumber sandwiches were not to be eaten in a lounging position. Reclining while eating was dangerously close to mimicking the lazy excess of Roman banquets, which was considered morally dubious. You ignore her and take a bite. The bread is soft, the butter cold and thick, the cucumber sliced so thin you could use it to read through. You close your eyes to savour it and hear a discreet cough. A park warden is standing over you, notebook at the ready. "Sir, madam," he begins, "you are in violation of public decency guidelines regarding the consumption of foodstuffs in a reclining position. Furthermore, that level of butter application may contravene the standards of moderation expected in a public setting." You blink at him. Is that really a law? You ask. He consults his book. Not as such, he admits, but it is enforceable under the Prevention of Public Nuisances Act when food is consumed in a manner liable to cause offence or undue remark. In modern terms, this is like being fined at a cafe because someone at the next table didn't like how enthusiastically you bit into your croissant. You sit up straight, hoping to appease him, but now he's inspecting your sandwich for other infractions. Is the crust cut evenly? Is the butter spread right to the edges? Too much filling, and you risk looking greedy. Too little, and it's a display of poor domestic skill. Either way, the court of public opinion, and possibly the magistrate, will not be on your side. Somewhere behind you, a pair of elderly ladies are whispering. You catch fragments, uncouth public display, dangerous precedent. You're tempted to point out that your sandwich is hardly a revolutionary act, but in Victorian England, optics were everything. A cucumber sandwich eaten incorrectly could tarnish your reputation faster than an unpaid tailor's bill. Eventually, the warden lets you off with a warning, but not before suggesting you review the accepted modes of genteel outdoor refreshment. You nod solemnly. Finish your sandwich in the most upright, non-threatening posture you can manage, and resolve to practice in front of a mirror before your next picnic. As you leave the park, you realise how perilous it is to combine food and public life here. In an age obsessed with appearances, even the simplest act, a bite of bread and cucumber, was a potential minefield of etiquette violations. And so you walk home, stomach full but dignity slightly bruised, knowing that somewhere in the dusty bylaws of Victorian London, there's a clause that could, with the right witness, turn your humble afternoon snack into a matter for the courts. You need fuel, but carrying coal dust through the street without a licence is a finable offence. You're stopped by a keen-eyed bobby who suspects you of trafficking in particulate matter. It's a damp, grey morning in Victorian London, the kind where the fog is so thick it feels like you're breathing warm porridge. You've been sent to fetch fuel for the small, struggling fire in your home. But coal is expensive, and in these parts, even coal dust, the leftover crumbs and shavings, has value. It's cheaper, burns quick, and if you're lucky, you can sweep it up from the yard of a friendly merchant for a few coins. Armed with a sack half filled with the black powdery stuff, you make your way home, keeping your head down. The bag isn't heavy, but it leaves a trail. Every step sends a little puff of soot into the damp air, dusting the cobblestones behind you like a breadcrumb path for very determined chimney sweeps. That's when you hear the voice. "You there!" Stop where you are. A constable emerges from the fog, notebook already in hand. He asks where you got the coal dust and, more importantly, whether you have a permit to carry it through the streets. You stare at him. A permit? For coal dust? Surely he's joking. But in Victorian London, transporting fuel, no matter how small the quantity, was regulated to prevent theft, smuggling, and what officials vaguely called public nuisances of the particulate sort. Coal merchants lobbied hard for such rules. After all, every handful of dust carried away without proper paperwork was potential lost profit. You try to explain you're just taking it home for your own hearth. He eyes you like you've just confessed to international smuggling. Without a license, that's trafficking, he says gravely, as if the powder in your sack is contraband opium. Here's the modern equivalent. Imagine being stopped for carrying a half-empty bag of barbecue charcoal down the street and being told you're in breach of fuel transportation laws. The constable asks to inspect your sack. You hand it over, and he gingerly peers inside, coughing theatrically as if the mere sight of coal dust has offended his lungs. He then informs you that you're in violation of the Metropolitan Fuel Carriage Ordinance, a real, if obscure, set of regulations that dictate who can carry fuel, how much, and in what type of container. Apparently, your old flour sack doesn't meet the approved receptacle standard. He jots down your name and address, and you can't help but notice the smug satisfaction on his face, as if he's just foiled a major criminal enterprise. You half expect him to summon a wagon for your seized goods. A small crowd gathers, whispering. You overhear one man mutter, "Coal dust smugglers, they're everywhere these days." A woman with a parasol shakes her head in disappointment. You suddenly feel like a character in a serialized penny dreadful, the Soot King of Soho. Eventually, the constable decides not to haul you in, this time. Instead, you're issued a warning and told to apply for the proper license if you wish to continue engaging in the conveyance of solid fuel derivatives. The absurdity of it would be funny if you weren't already calculating how much the fine will cut into your week's food budget. Back home, you empty the sack into the fireplace, the dust swirling like a storm cloud. You cough, but it's a good-natured cough. This is your dust, legally dubious though it may be. And as you warm your hands by the small, eager fire, you make a mental note. Next time, bring a container with a lid and maybe a fake name for the constable's notebook. Because in Victorian England, even the most humble act, carrying home a bit of fuel, could make you a criminal in the eyes of the law, if the paperwork wasn't perfectly in order. You spot a piano outside a pub and can't resist banging out a tune. Within moments, a stern-faced officer charges you with musical disruption of a public thoroughfare. Clearly, your rendition of Chopsticks was too avant-garde for Victorian tastes. It begins innocently enough. You're walking down a bustling London street in the late afternoon when your ears catch the faint, tinny sound of a piano being tuned. Outside a lively public house sits a slightly battered upright, its lacquer dulled by rain and time, with a chalkboard propped beside it reading, "Play a song for a penny. This is, frankly, irresistible." You haven't touched a keyboard since your cousin's wedding, but a crowd is a crowd, and you fancy yourself a bit of a performer. You deposit a penny in the jar and take your place on the rickety stool. The keys are uneven, some sticking, others clanking like loose silverware. but you start anyway. Softly at first, then louder, because a tune this good demands volume. That's when it happens. The pub door bursts open, and a constable strides toward you with the grim energy of someone who's had to listen to one too many ill-advised public performances. His moustache twitches. "Sir, madam," he says, "you are in breach of Section 4 of the Street Music Regulation Act." You pause mid-note. "The what now?" "The law," he explains, "was designed to limit the nuisance and obstruction caused by public musicians, particularly those whose talents might charitably be described as developing. According to the Act, any music played in a public space without prior permission from the local authorities could be deemed disruptive, especially if it caused passers-by to stop, linger, or, heaven forbid, dance in the street. The small crowd around you disperses instantly, unwilling to be named as accomplices in a sonic crime. Someone mutters, "Never like chopsticks anyway," before vanishing into the fog. You protest, insisting that you are simply providing a little cheer to the neighbourhood. The constable is unmoved. "It's not the tune. It's the principle," he says, though his expression makes it clear the tune isn't helping. Here's the modern equivalent. Imagine playing a busker's guitar at a friend's cafe and being slapped with a formal warning for unauthorised acoustic disturbance. The constable asks to see your permit. Of course, you don't have one. You didn't even know such a thing existed. Apparently, applying for a street music licence involves a lengthy form, 2 character references, and a sworn promise not to play anything likely to cause offence, which in this case might include most of your repertoire. You're issued a citation and told the piano will be secured as evidence. The pub landlord sighs as the instrument is wheeled away, presumably to some municipal warehouse where it will sit beside other contraband like unapproved sandwich boards and overly wide umbrellas. Walking home, you feel both embarrassed and oddly proud. Few people can say they've been arrested, however briefly, for their interpretation of a children's tune. Still, you make a mental note to steer clear of public instruments for the foreseeable future. The incident becomes a minor sensation in your neighbourhood. Children reenact your arrest in the street, pretending to be you and the constable, with one child hammering a make-believe piano while the other bellows, "Section 4. Neighbours greet you with a grin and a wink," though you suspect at least one has reported your name to the magistrate's office just to be safe. And so you've learned a valuable lesson. In Victorian England, music in the wrong place, at the wrong time, without the right paperwork, is not art. It's a punishable offence. Your fingers may itch for the keys, but your freedom, you decide, is worth far more than a penny's applause. You're accused of inquisitive loitering just for glancing in a shop window for more than 10 seconds. Now you're explaining to a judge why you spent so long admiring pickled eels. It all starts on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in Victorian London. The streets smell faintly of wet cobblestones and horse traffic, and you're strolling past a row of small shops when something in a window catches your eye. It's not jewellery, or clothing, or even a particularly flashy sign. It's a large jar of pickled eels, floating serenely in brine, their pale coils glinting faintly in the light. You stop. You stare. Because, really, who wouldn't? The jar is huge, the eels are oddly hypnotic, and the entire scene feels like something that belongs in a museum of unsettling food. You tilt your head to get a better look, wondering if they're for eating, decoration, or possibly both. 10 seconds pass. Then 20. You're lost in eel-based contemplation. That's when the shop door opens and a stern-faced constable steps out from somewhere down the street. He approaches with the slow inevitability of a man who has decided you are up to something. "Afternoon," he says. "Care to explain your activities here?" You blink. "I'm looking at eels?" Unfortunately, Victorian public order laws were surprisingly broad, and one of them, often applied at the discretion of the police, covered inquisitive loitering. In theory, it was meant to deter suspicious behaviour near homes, businesses, and public buildings. In practice, it could be invoked any time someone stood still too long, especially if they looked remotely interested in anything through glass. You try to explain that you were merely admiring the shopkeeper's fine eel arrangement. The constable raises an eyebrow. "For 30 seconds, he asks, as if you've just confessed to casing the Bank of England. Here's the modern equivalent. Imagine pausing to admire a pastry display in a cafe and being accused of plotting an elaborate éclair heist. The shopkeeper emerges, wiping his hands on his apron. He's not angry exactly, but he looks wary. Pickled eels are, after all, a valuable commodity, and he can't have strangers loitering about, possibly frightening away paying customers. "You'll have to move along," he says. The constable takes your name for his notebook. He notes the exact time, the duration of your eel gazing, and the fact that you appeared deeply engrossed in the goods upon display. The way he says it makes you sound like a professional eel thief. You're told that repeat offences could lead to a fine, or even a night in the cells. You try to imagine explaining that to your friends. "What are you in for?" "Eels." Reluctantly, you step away, though not before casting one last longing glance at the jar. The eels stare back, impassive, as though judging you for your lack of commitment to seeing this through. The incident follows you for days. Neighbours ask why a constable was speaking to you outside the fishmonger's. A child down the street claims you were caught trying to talk to the eels. Someone even starts referring to you as the loiterer of Limehouse. In the end, you decide it's best to admire shop windows in passing, no matter how tempting the display. Victorian England, after all, was a place where lingering curiosity could be rebranded as criminal intent. And while the eels may have been beautiful in their own strange way, no jar of pickled seafood is worth ending up in the magistrate's court for extended admiration of perishable goods. You hold your sweetheart's hand in the park, but the local busybody reports you for open demonstration of fondness. A day in jail for a single thumbstroke. It seemed harmless enough at the time. The sun was warm, the breeze gentle, and the gravel path through the park crunched pleasantly underfoot as you and your beloved strolled together. Your gloved hand found theirs as naturally as breathing. It was a simple gesture, comforting, affectionate, entirely unremarkable by modern standards. But in the rigid social order of Victorian England, it was akin to broadcasting your private life on the front page of the Times. For a few blissful minutes, you're lost in your own world. The chatter of other park-goers fades, and your steps fall into perfect rhythm. Then you make the fatal mistake. You gently trace your thumb over the back of their hand, a tender, absent-minded motion, the kind that today would barely merit a second glance. Somewhere to your left, a sharp intake of breath cuts through the birdsong. Prudence Ashworth, unofficial moral guardian of the neighbourhood, standing rigid with outrage, parasol clenched like a weapon. Her eyes widen as though she has caught you in the act of something far more scandalous. In a matter of minutes, she's flagged down a passing constable. You're accused, in crisp and unforgiving tones, of open demonstration of fondness in a public setting. The constable, clearly embarrassed but bound by the letter of the law, begins taking notes. The exact nature of the fondness is recorded with all the gravity of a treason charge. Hand clasped in mutual agreement, thumb in motion. In Victorian society, public displays of affection were not just frowned upon. They were actively policed, at least in the polite areas of town. It was believed such conduct could erode public morality, spark gossip, and encourage others to forget themselves in the heat of the moment. The acceptable limit for physical contact in public was roughly the amount needed to help someone over a puddle. Anything more risked legal attention. Here's the modern comparison. Imagine being fined for posting a mildly romantic selfie online because it sets a dangerous precedent for the community. You attempt to argue that your gesture was entirely innocent. The constable remains unmoved. The law doesn't care about intent, he says. Only about the example it sets. You and your sweetheart are escorted to the station, where you're placed in separate waiting rooms to preserve decency while the matter is processed. The magistrate hears your case the next morning. His chambers smell faintly of ink and damp wool. He listens to the charges, his expression unreadable. One day's confinement, he rules at last, to reflect upon the importance of propriety in public. You spend the night in a cell that smells of old stone and damp straw, replaying the moment over and over in your mind. Your sweetheart, equally chastened, writes you a note through the bars promising that next time you'll limit yourselves to verbal expressions of affection in public spaces. When you're finally released, you find that word has already spread. Neighbours greet you with knowing smirks, and the local gossip mill runs at full capacity. Did you hear? someone whispers as you pass. They were holding hands, right there in broad daylight. From then on, you both walk through the park at a respectful distance, hands safely clasped behind your backs. Faces composed into expressions of polite neutrality. The romance remains, of course, but in Victorian England, you learn quickly that some forms of love must be carefully hidden, lest a single thumbstroke land you back before the magistrate. You're at a bustling market, but just standing there, quietly, absorbing the chaos. Suddenly, you're disturbing the natural order by means of unnatural silence. Try explaining introversion to a Victorian magistrate. It's late morning in the heart of the city, and the marketplace is in full swing. Everywhere you look, something is moving. Horses clatter past, vendors shout their wares, children dart between stalls clutching sticky pennies, and someone is almost certainly haggling over the price of a cabbage. The air smells of fish, fresh bread, and an unidentifiable undercurrent that probably comes from the tanner's shop 2 streets over. You're here for no particular reason. Maybe you needed a change of scenery, or maybe the idea of wandering aimlessly among humanity appealed to you more than sitting at home. You stand just off the main thoroughfare, enjoying the scene in that quiet, slightly detached way that comes naturally to you. Your hands are in your pockets, your face neutral, your voice absent. This is your first mistake. In Victorian England, where the market was a place of business, gossip, and relentless noise, stillness was suspicious. A person not participating in the chaos was assumed to be watching, planning, or worse, judging. Standing silently in such an environment was considered, in certain legal and social circles, an unnatural act liable to unsettle the peace. A hawk-eyed constable spots you and begins to weave his way through the crowd. He approaches as if you've just been caught chiseling Queen Victoria's likeness into a turnip. "Afternoon," he says with the kind of forced politeness reserved for people he already suspects of wrongdoing. "What are you about, then?" You hesitate, because the real answer, just standing here, doesn't seem like it will help your case. Instead, you mumble something about enjoying the sights and sounds. "Not doing much of either from the looks of it," he replies. Then he produces his small leather-bound notebook. Name? It's not that there's an actual statute for excessive silence, but Victorian law had a wonderful knack for framing almost any behaviour as a public nuisance if it made someone uncomfortable. In this case, your lack of noise in a noisy place has been reinterpreted as disturbing the natural order by means of unnatural silence. Apparently, the market thrives on predictable patterns, yelling, laughing, arguing, and your quiet presence is like dropping a stone into a still pond. Here's the modern comparison. Imagine going to a music festival, sitting calmly in a deck chair, and being approached by security because you're not contributing to the atmosphere. You try explaining that you're simply introverted. The constable frowns as though you've just spoken in fluent Greek. In Victorian England, introversion isn't a personality trait. It's a suspicious condition, possibly contagious, and best handled by swift removal from the public space. A small group of onlookers gathers. You can hear the muttered commentary. Spooky sort, that one. Just standing there. Probably casing the bread stall. Bet he's got opinions about eel prices. Before you know it, you're escorted to the magistrate's office, where your unnatural silence is recorded in elaborate legal language that makes it sound like a plot against the crown. The magistrate peers at you over his spectacles. "Markets are for trade and social interaction," he declares, "not for lurking like a spectre. You're given a warning and told that if you must be silent, you should do so in the privacy of your own home, or at least while walking briskly so as not to unsettle others." Back in the market the following week, you make a point of muttering under your breath, nodding at random stalls, and occasionally making mild observations about turnip quality, just enough to blend in. But deep down, you know you'll never quite shake your reputation as that unnervingly quiet one, proof that in Victorian England, even doing nothing could be a crime if you did it well enough. You sit on the base of a bronze hero to tie your shoe. Within moments, you're accused of indecent proximity to public commemorative effigy. History, it turns out, is not for sitting. It's a breezy afternoon, and the town square is doing what town squares do best in Victorian England, being a place for parades, speeches, and the occasional very slow horse cart. In the centre stands the great bronze statue of Sir Reginald Pocklington Smythe, a military figure of immense importance to someone, somewhere, though no one in the square could tell you exactly what he did without first consulting the nearest plaque. You're on your way home when one of your bootlaces decides to unravel itself in a deliberate act of sabotage. The nearest surface for dealing with it just happens to be the broad, flat stone base of Sir Reginald himself. You sit, pull your foot up, and begin tying your lace. The granite is cold, the bronze looms above you, and for a moment you're just grateful for the solid perch. Unfortunately, in the unspoken but rigid etiquette of Victorian public life, statues were not furniture. They were sacred markers of history, meant to inspire awe from a respectful distance, not support the weight of your backside while you wrestled with footwear. You haven't even finished the first knot when you hear the distinct click of a constable's boots on the stone. He clears his throat. "Sir, madam, I must inform you that you are in breach of Section 12 of the Public Monuments Decorum Act." You pause mid-loop. "The what?" He gestures at the bronze hero above. "Indecent proximity to a public commemorative effigy. It's a matter of respect, you see. In Victorian England, public statues were considered almost as untouchable as members of the royal family. Leaning on them, touching them, or heaven forbid using them as a resting spot could be taken as a personal affront to the memory of the figure depicted. Even tying your shoe at their feet was seen as dragging the noble legacy of the empire down to the level of everyday inconveniences. Here's the modern equivalent. Imagine sitting on the base of a war memorial for 30 seconds to check your phone, only to have a bylaw officer treat you like you've just spray-painted it neon pink. A small crowd gathers, drawn in by the promise of minor public scandal. Someone whispers, "He's got his foot on it." Another gasps audibly when you place your palm against the stone for balance. A child points at you with the fascination usually reserved for escaped circus animals. You attempt to explain that you were simply tying your shoe and meant no disrespect to Sir Reginald or his presumably illustrious career. The constable nods gravely, writes in his notebook, and then, because Victorian law loves a flourish, asks whether you have any witnesses to verify your innocent shoelace narrative. The crowd, now fully enjoying itself, remains silent. The magistrate hears your case later that week. He listens to the description of your crime with the solemnity of a man hearing charges of treason. Public monuments, he declares, must remain unsullied by idle contact. If the base of Sir Reginald were for sitting, the sculptor would have installed cushions. You are issued a formal caution and told that any repeat offence will result in a fine. The constable adds, in a tone that suggests he's doing you a favour, "Next time, sir, madam, perhaps tie your shoe against a wall. Walls cannot be insulted. From that day forward, you give statues a wide berth, lest you once again be accused of indecent proximity. And every time you pass Sir Reginald in the square, you imagine him looking down at you with bronze disapproval, a silent reminder that in Victorian England, even your shoelaces were subject to the long arm of the law. You lay out your carrots for sale, but the arrangement is suggestively arrayed. You are charged with disorderly exhibition of produce. The judge demands you sort your radishes more modestly. It's market day, and you've been up since dawn hauling baskets of vegetables into town. The cabbages are crisp, the potatoes are clean. Well, cleaner than they were. And the carrots, long, bright, and alarmingly symmetrical, are your pride and joy. You set up your stall with care, arranging everything so that it looks inviting. A little pyramid of turnips here, a tidy line of leeks there. And then, because you're feeling particularly artistic, you lay the carrots in 2 neat rows, their tapered ends all pointing the same way like a battalion on parade. Big mistake. Victorian England had a curious relationship with public morality, and this extended, bizarrely, into the realm of agriculture. While the law didn't explicitly state no seductive vegetables, there were broad regulations about disorderly or indecent exhibitions in public view, which could be applied to anything the local moral authorities found questionable. Apparently, your carrots have crossed some invisible line. It begins innocently enough. You're selling well, chatting politely with customers, and congratulating yourself on the shine of your radishes. But then you notice Mrs. Penelope Dorrington, self-appointed guardian of virtue, standing at a distance, her parasol raised like a periscope. She's staring at your stall with an expression that suggests you've just laid out something truly scandalous. Moments later, she's fetched a constable. "Look at the arrangement," she hisses, as though your vegetables have committed a crime all by themselves. The constable, visibly uncomfortable, peers at the display, clears his throat, and produces his notebook. "I'm afraid this constitutes a disorderly exhibition," he says. You blink. "They're carrots, yes. But they're—" He trails off, unwilling, or perhaps unable, to articulate exactly what makes your root vegetables objectionable. Instead, he mutters something about inappropriate alignment and begins taking down your details. Here's the modern equivalent. Imagine being fined at a farmer's market because your cucumbers were arranged in a way that might cause comment. The law, as it turns out, was vague enough to cover almost anything. In the eyes of the magistrate, public displays had to uphold the moral dignity of the town. Even inanimate objects could be guilty of undermining that dignity if they drew the wrong sort of attention. And if the wrong sort of attention involved a knowing smirk from a passing dock worker, well, that was all the evidence anyone needed. Your produce is seized pending further investigation. You try to explain that carrots are naturally shaped and that no amount of rearranging will change that. The constable says he understands. But rules are rules. When your case is heard, the magistrate, looking as if he would rather be anywhere else, orders that your vegetables be displayed in a more modest fashion. This involves scattering them randomly in a basket, so that no one carrot is prominent enough to be a public hazard. The radishes, he adds, should be placed in separate containers, as their clustering could be misinterpreted. By the time you return to the market, the story has spread. Other vendors greet you with exaggerated caution. "Careful there, mate. Don't line up those parsnips, or you'll get the Dorrington treatment." A fishmonger down the lane has even placed a sign reading, "All seafood arranged in morally acceptable fashion." From then on, you sell your produce with the haphazard abandon of someone who has learned a painful lesson. In Victorian England, even vegetables could be indecent if you let them get too organised. And as you watch customers rummage through your now chaotic stall, you can't help but think, somewhere out there, missus, Dorrington is sleeping soundly, knowing she has saved the town from the moral peril of a well-arranged carrot. It's Sunday. You're caught in a heated game of marbles, which is technically gaming and gambling on the Sabbath. The marbles are confiscated, and you're considered a menace to moral order. The morning begins innocently enough. Church bells toll in the distance, and the air smells faintly of coal smoke and fresh bread. You've sat through the morning sermon, nodded solemnly at all the right moments, and sung the hymns with respectable gusto. By early afternoon, you find yourself loitering near the green with a few friends. Someone produces a cloth bag, the telltale clink inside betraying its contents, marbles. To you, this is harmless recreation. To Victorian society, at least on a Sunday, it is a grave moral failing. The Lord's Day Observance Act was very clear. No unnecessary labour, no public amusements, and certainly no games that could be construed as gambling. And yes, even if you're only playing for fun, the law has a way of finding the gambling in anything involving skill, chance, and small, shiny objects. You kneel on the dirt, flicking your shooter marble with expert precision. The satisfying clack as it knocks another marble out of the ring makes you grin. This is the most excitement you've had all week. But the joy is short-lived. Out of the corner of your eye, you spot the unmistakable silhouette of Mr. Horace Pettigrew, the village's most pious busybody, bearing down on you like a moral torpedo. "What's this, then?" he demands, hands clasped behind his back, his tone hovering somewhere between righteous indignation and sheer delight at having caught someone in the act. You mumble something about just passing the time, but it's too late. He's already summoned a constable. The constable arrives, looking like a man who'd much rather be anywhere else but is nonetheless bound by duty. Under Section 7 of the Lord's Day Observance Act, he intones, "You are hereby charged with unlawful gaming on the Sabbath." He stoops, scoops up the marbles with exaggerated care, and drops them into his pocket as though they are dangerous contraband. Here's the modern equivalent. Imagine getting your board game seized because you dared play it within earshot of a church service. You protest that no money was changing hands, but this does little to help your case. According to the law, the mere act of competing on a Sunday carries the spirit of gaming, which apparently corrupts the sanctity of the day. In short, your marbles are the thin end of a very dangerous wedge. You're marched to the magistrate's office, where your crime is read aloud in a tone normally reserved for cattle theft. The magistrate peers over his spectacles at you, his expression equal parts disappointment and weariness. Sunday, he says slowly, is a day for rest, not frivolity. You point out that you are resting, just horizontally over a game board, but this line of reasoning fails to impress. Your punishment is mild, an official warning and the loss of your marbles, but the damage to your reputation is severe. By evening, word has spread across the village. Caught playing marbles on the Sabbath, people whisper. Some shake their heads in pity. Others smile knowingly, as though you are now a confirmed rebel against the moral order. The next Sunday, you keep a low profile. You attend church, walk home at a dignified pace, and spend the afternoon pretending to read a moral tract while occasionally glancing out the window at the empty green. You imagine the marbles, now in the constable's possession, sitting in some dusty evidence drawer, forever tainted by their association with Sabbath crime. From then on, you save your games for Mondays, which in Victorian England is the one day of the week where no one cares how you fritter away your time, as long as it isn't near a church and doesn't look too much like fun. You need clean socks. The public fountain seems ideal, but it's a desecration of municipal waters. Now, your socks and your reputation are both in hot water. It starts, as many minor Victorian scandals do, with practicality. You've been walking for miles on cobbled streets in heavy boots, and your socks have reached a state best described as olfactory warfare. You'd intended to wash them at home, but the pump is broken, and the water seller charges more than you can afford. Then, as you stroll through the town square, you spot it, the public fountain, glistening in the afternoon light. Cool, fresh water, gurgling invitingly into a wide stone basin. Perfect. You slip off your boots, extract the offending socks, holding them at arm's length for the sake of public decency, and begin swishing them around in the water. The sound is oddly soothing, a soft flap-flap, accompanied by the gentle burble of the fountain. For a moment, you forget you're in the middle of a bustling square. Unfortunately, several other people have not forgotten. A fishmonger, hauling a crate of eels, pauses to stare. A passing governess hustles her young charges away as though you've just committed a violent crime. Within minutes, the local constable appears, moving with the grim inevitability of a man who has been summoned to deal with yet another fountain incident. "Sir, madam," he begins, "you are in violation of Section 9 of the Civic Sanitation Act, desecration of municipal waters." You blink. They're just socks. He gestures gravely to the carved stone spout. That fountain is a public amenity. People drink from it. You cannot be contaminating it with hosiery. His pause on the last word suggests he considers socks to be the lowest possible rung of the clothing hierarchy. Here's the modern comparison. Imagine rinsing your gym socks in a Starbucks sink and having someone call the police. In Victorian England, fountains weren't just decorative, they were a vital source of clean water in an era where clean was a relative term. Protecting them from misuse was a matter of public health and civic pride. Misuse could mean anything from letting a dog drink from the basin to, in your case, laundering small garments in full view of horrified bystanders. The constable confiscates your socks pending hygienic disposal, which sounds far more ominous than it is. He then takes your name and occupation, noting them in a leather-bound ledger that will likely sit in a municipal archive for the next century. The walk to the magistrate's office is short but humiliating. People glance at your bare ankles and whisper. You overhear one man murmur, "sock washer," in the same tone he might use for arsonist. The magistrate himself is an older gentleman with a moustache so large it could probably be taxed. He listens to the charges, sighs, and delivers his verdict. A formal caution and a reminder that municipal water is for public refreshment, not personal laundering. You're dismissed, but the damage is done. Your neighbours now see you not as the person who once helped Mrs. Whitcomb carry her groceries, but as the reckless soul who sullied the town's most photogenic landmark with footcloths. From then on, you wash your socks at home no matter the cost, even if it means boiling them in a pot normally reserved for soup, and every time you pass the fountain, its steady stream seems to gurgle a personal warning. Don't even think about it. Because in Victorian England, your laundry wasn't just your business, it was quite literally everyone else's. You're just walking, but your stride is a little too jaunty. Accused of perambulation with intent to bewilder, you're told to walk less suspiciously or face consequences. It's late afternoon, and you've decided to take the long way home. The sun is peeking through the clouds in that rare, golden way it sometimes does in Victorian England, and for once, you're in a good mood. Your pace is brisk, your step light, and, because you're feeling whimsical, you've added just the tiniest bounce to your stride. This, as it turns out, is your second mistake. The first mistake was assuming nobody in Victorian society would notice. You're halfway down a cobbled street lined with shop fronts when you sense it. The heavy gaze of suspicion. A shopkeeper polishing his window pauses mid-swipe. A woman arranging hats in a milliner's display leans ever so slightly closer to the glass. Even the street dog looks up, as if to say, "Where are you going with that walk, mate?" In this era, walking was more than just locomotion. It was a social signal. There were approved walking styles. The purposeful, I am on business pace. The languid, I am respectable and in no hurry stroll. And the stiff, formal promenade used in parks. Anything outside those patterns was ripe for misinterpretation. Your jaunty step? That reads as trouble. Enter the constable. He materializes from an alley like he's been waiting all day for someone to commit a pedestrian crime. "Afternoon," he says, his tone polite, but loaded with suspicion. "Might I inquire as to your destination?" You shrug. "Just walking." He narrows his eyes. "It's the manner of your walking that concerns me." He pulls a small notebook from his coat and flips it open. "You're aware, I assume, of the Metropolitan Streets Conduct Ordinance?" You are not aware. But apparently, perambulation with intent to bewilder is a recognized nuisance, falling somewhere between loitering and improper whistling. The idea is that an unusual walk could be a distraction, a disturbance, or worse, part of some criminal plot. After all, why would someone walk like that unless they were trying to unsettle the public or signal to an accomplice? Here's the modern equivalent, being stopped in a shopping mall because your vibe is off. A small crowd gathers, eager for drama. You hear snippets of their speculation. "Looks like a foreign gate to me. That's not a workman's walk. Bet they've got stolen silk under that coat." You attempt to demonstrate a less suspicious walk, which only makes things worse. In trying to tone it down, you accidentally veer into an exaggeratedly slow shuffle, giving the impression you're either hiding an injury or casing the local bakery. The constable shakes his head gravely. That won't do either. Soon you're escorted to the magistrate's office, where the charge is read out in its full, ridiculous glory. The magistrate, who looks as though he hasn't smiled since the Crimean War, peers down at you. "Public spaces require predictability," he intones. "Unorthodox walking undermines public trust. You are issued a formal caution and advised to adopt a more standard gait." This is accompanied by a brief walking demonstration from the constable, who performs a model respectable stride as though auditioning for a particularly slow-moving parade. From then on, you keep your walking style deliberately bland. No bounces, no swings of the arms, no sudden changes of pace. You blend in with the dull, steady flow of pedestrians, indistinguishable from the man 2 paces ahead of you or the woman 3 paces behind. But every so often, when you're sure no constable is watching, you allow yourself the tiniest bit of jaunt in your step, just enough to remember that once, briefly, you were a pedestrian outlaw in the streets of Victorian England. You close your eyes for a second on a park bench. Intent to doze in a non-designated area earns you a ticket and a lecture about the dangers of unsanctioned sleep. It all starts innocently enough. You've been walking for hours, the cobbled streets have turned your feet into 2 separate medical complaints, and the combination of warm sun and gentle breeze is whispering, "Just rest your eyes for a moment." The park bench you find is practically inviting you to collapse upon it. Smooth, worn wood, a view of swaying trees, and best of all, no one else around to bother you. You lean back, close your eyes, and begin to drift into that delightful space between waking and dreaming. Unfortunately, in Victorian England, that liminal space is heavily regulated. It turns out there were public order laws designed to keep loafers and vagrants from lingering too long in communal areas. The belief was that people who slept in public were either shirking work, committing moral offences in their dreams, yes, that was a genuine fear, or attracting the wrong sort of company. To the Victorian mind, unconsciousness in the open air was suspicious. What were you hiding from? Who were you waiting for? Why weren't you doing something visibly productive, like darning socks or staring gloomily into the distance? So, of course, your moment of bliss is interrupted by a shadow falling over you. You open your eyes to see a constable looming, moustache twitching with disapproval. "Sir, madam," he says in the solemn tone usually reserved for reading last rites, "you are in violation of the Parks and Public Decorum Statute, Section 5, unsanctioned slumber." You protest. "I wasn't asleep, just resting my eyelids." He shakes his head. "That's exactly what the last one said. Here's the modern equivalent. Getting fined for nodding off on a train because it wasn't a designated nap carriage. The constable insists on writing you a ticket, pulling out a small pad and carefully noting the time, your location, and eyelids fully closed for longer than 5 seconds. Passers-by glance over with mild curiosity, the way one might look at a stray dog being coaxed away from a butcher's shop. A small child points and whispers to his mother, "Is that the nap criminal?" The humiliation deepens when the constable launches into the required lecture. A rambling 5-minute speech about the dangers of public dozing. Apparently, sleeping in the open makes you vulnerable to pickpockets, the elements, and, most chillingly, to immoral suggestion from nearby strangers. You resist the urge to point out that the only immoral suggestion you've received lately was from the pie vendor trying to pass off yesterday's pork pies as fresh. Your official caution comes with instructions. If you wish to nap in public again, you must apply for a permit, which is only valid for designated resting zones and strictly between the hours of 1 p.m. and 1:15 p.m. Once released, you attempt to resume your walk, but word spreads fast in Victorian parks. By the time you pass the duck pond, you're convinced every gardener, nursemaid and newspaper reader knows you as the sleeper. From then on, you perfect the art of the fake wakefulness. Eyes wide open, posture upright, head nodding ever so slightly as if you're deeply engaged in thinking. On the rare occasion you dare to close your eyes outdoors, you do it with one knee bouncing, as though to prove you're far too active to be accused of nap-related offences. Still, deep down, you miss that brief, glorious moment of sunshine, birdsong and blissful unconsciousness. Because in Victorian England, you could be arrested for loafing, fined for strolling, and ticketed for sleeping. But dreaming was still free, if you could find a safe place to do it. You bump into someone and apologise profusely. After your 15th sorry, an officer warns you for public repetition of contrition beyond acceptable limits. You try apologising for apologising. Bad move. It happens in the middle of a crowded Victorian street, where elbows are weapons and parasols are deployed with the accuracy of bayonets. You misjudge the distance between yourself and a passing gentleman, clip his shoulder, and instinct takes over. "Sorry," you blurt. He gives a curt nod and continues on his way, but you're already on sorry number 2, muttered to his retreating back just in case he didn't hear the first one. By sorry number 5, you've started to trail after him, compelled by the deep, irrational need to ensure this stranger understands your boundless remorse for the half-inch of fabric-to-fabric contact. Somewhere between sorry number 9 and sorry number 12, you notice other pedestrians slowing to watch. One man even mutters, "They're going for the record." Unfortunately, this is Victorian England, and public behaviour is a regulated art form. There is such a thing as too much politeness. The concept of excessive public contrition falls under a wider set of nuisance laws designed to preserve order and dignity in the streets. In theory, it's to prevent time wasting, public scenes, or unwanted attention. In practice, it means you're about to be written up for the crime of being extremely aggressively polite. A constable materialises from nowhere, as they so often do in these situations. He clears his throat. "That's enough of that, sir. Madam, 15 apologies for a single incident constitutes repetition beyond acceptable limits under the street etiquette code." You blink. "Oh, sorry, 16. he says, making a note in his little book. Here's the modern equivalent. Getting a parking ticket because you said thank you too many times to the same waiter. The constable explains that repeated apologies can cause public bewilderment and unnecessary disruption to pedestrian flow. More importantly, it sets a dangerous precedent. If one person apologizes 17 times for a minor collision, the whole street might grind to a halt in a spiraling vortex of mutual contrition. A small crowd gathers, and you can feel their eyes on you. Someone chuckles. A woman in a bonnet shakes her head, as though she always knew you'd end up like this. The man you bumped into in the first place is long gone, blissfully unaware that your life has just taken a legal turn. The constable gives you the option: accept an official caution now, or accompany him to the magistrate for formal processing. You wisely choose the caution, but the ordeal is not over. Victorian cautions often come with a verbal rectitude session. For the next 10 minutes, you're lectured on the virtues of measured politeness and the dangers of apology inflation. From that day forward, you become hyper-aware of your sorries. At first, you try to limit yourself to one per incident, but that feels barbaric, so you settle on 2. The first for the actual collision, the second as a follow-up just in case the first sounded insincere. Anything beyond that feels reckless. Still, every so often, the old instinct takes over. You'll step on someone's foot, mutter sorry 3 times, then immediately panic, eyes scanning the street for a constable with a twitching moustache and a citation book. Because in Victorian England, you could be fined for loafing, ticketed for napping, and cautioned for strolling too jauntily, but nothing quite beats the absurdity of being punished for caring too much about other people's personal space. You pick up your teacup with your left hand at a public tea room. Instantly, there are gasps, a stern matron, and a citation for unorthodox beverage engagement. You never realized tea could be so fraught with peril. It happens so quickly you barely register the crime. One moment, you're idly admiring the wallpaper, floral but aggressively beige. And the next, you're lifting your cup of Darjeeling with your non-dominant hand. The room goes silent in that very British way. No one says a word, but the weight of 100 disapproving stares descends upon you like a wet wool blanket. In Victorian England, tea drinking wasn't just a pastime, it was a performance. Every detail mattered. The temperature of the brew, the angle of the cup, the precise number of sugar lumps, and heaven help you if you stirred counterclockwise. The dominant hand was part of the choreography. Right-handedness was the default expectation, partly because of etiquette manuals, partly because society had decided left-handedness was somewhere between a regrettable personal habit and outright witchcraft. Your mistake, therefore, is not simply practical, it's a full-blown social statement. Before you can set the cup down, a stern matron in black silk sweeps toward your table like a ship under full sail. She doesn't introduce herself. She doesn't need to. Her job, clearly, is to protect the sanctity of afternoon tea from rebels like you. "Sir, madam," she says, "you are in breach of the Beverage Engagement Protocol, Section 3, improper hand usage during public tea consumption." She gestures to a posted notice on the wall. You hadn't noticed it before, but there it is, in looping copper plate. All patrons shall conduct tea engagement in the orthodox manner, right hand only, unless physically incapacitated. Here's the modern equivalent. Being told you can't hold your coffee cup in your left hand at Starbucks without filling out a waiver. The other patrons resume their chatter. But now you can feel their glances, furtive but judgmental, each time you raise the cup again. You try switching to your right hand, but the damage is done. Your tea is cooler now, and your dignity has sunk faster than a biscuit left too long in the cup. The matron, accompanied by a junior tea room attendant, insists on taking down your name and occupation for the register. You're issued a formal caution and advised to attend a short etiquette rehabilitation session the following week, where you will apparently be retrained in the correct handling of cups, saucers, and teaspoons. At this point, you consider just drinking the tea from the spout of the teapot in protest. But you suspect that would result in immediate exile from polite society. Etiquette manuals of the period were clear. Left-hand usage suggested carelessness, defiance, or, most dangerously, foreignness. To a Victorian observer, that single movement might imply you'd been raised without proper guidance or, worse, that you were making some sort of anarchic political statement over the milk jug. You leave the tea room chastened, with the faint rustle of whispers following you out the door. From then on, you make an effort to blend in at public tea gatherings, even going so far as to practice your right-handed cup lift at home in front of the mirror. It's awkward at first, you spill more than you sip, but eventually it becomes muscle memory. Still, late at night, in the privacy of your kitchen, you sometimes cradle a cup in your left hand just to feel the quiet thrill of rebellion. Because in Victorian England, it wasn't enough to drink tea, you had to drink it correctly, or risk becoming the day's most scandalous headline in the imaginary newspaper of your neighbours' minds. It's a foggy night in London. Visibility is somewhere between pea soup and blindfolded. You mistake a motionless bobby for a lamppost and attempt to hang your coat on him. Instantly, you're facing charges of misidentification of a public official and willful hanging of outer garments on the Queen's constabulary. You try to plead poor eyesight, but the real crime is that he's now wearing your best overcoat. London fog in the Victorian era was not your modern-day delicate Instagram filter mist. This was an industrial-strength wall of damp yellow-grey opacity that could hide a horse, a hansom cab, and an entire brass band without breaking a sweat. It clung to your clothes, curled into your hair, and had a knack for finding its way into your tea. Visibility, on nights like this, was reduced to about the length of your arm if you squinted. Which is why, making your way home after a long day, you find yourself relying more on instinct than sight. The familiar shapes of the street, shop signs, carriage lamps, the occasional curb, blur into an indistinct smear. Somewhere between Fleet Street and wherever your lodgings are, you spot what you believe to be a tall, reassuring lamppost. Perfect! You've been meaning to shrug off your coat for a while. It's damp, heavy, and making you smell faintly of chimney soot. Without hesitation, you step forward and, with the careful grace of someone who's convinced they're interacting with an inanimate object, you lift the coat and drape it over the lamppost. The lamppost clears its throat. You freeze. It's not a lamppost, it's a constable. To his credit, he stays remarkably composed, though there's a twitch at the corner of his moustache that suggests he's moments away from exploding into righteous indignation. "Sir, madam," he says, "you have just committed an act of gross misidentification and willful garment placement upon a serving officer of the Queen. Here's the modern equivalent, accidentally trying to plug your phone charger into a stranger's ear at a coffee shop." The constable, now wearing your best overcoat, doesn't hand it back immediately. Instead, he insists on recording the incident in his little leather-bound notebook, which appears to have 2 entire pages dedicated to oddities committed under conditions of fog. You attempt to explain that the night's visibility is practically illegal in itself, but he cuts you off. Ignorance of lamp versus lawman is no defence. A small knot of onlookers forms, drawn like moths to the flame of public embarrassment. Someone snickers. Another person asks whether they should fetch the gas lighter to relight the officer. You're informed that this falls under multiple infractions: misidentification of a public official, impeding a constable's duty through unsolicited accessorizing, and, most damningly, disrespect to Her Majesty's uniform. The formal process is absurdly thorough. The constable takes a statement, questions you about your vision. Have you ever mistaken a horse for a bench? And finally, after much sighing, hands your coat back, though not before noting that it's slightly improved by police bearing. From that night on, you approach every vertical object in the fog with extreme caution. Street sign? Could be a butler. Telegraph pole? Might be a very tall vicar. Lamp post? Possibly the same constable, waiting to see if you'll try it again. And yet, on the rare evenings when the fog is so thick you can barely see your own shoes, you still feel a faint twinge of paranoia. Because in Victorian England, you could be fined for napping, arrested for whistling, and, apparently, prosecuted for confusing a member of law enforcement with public street furniture. You're visiting a friend, but their door is heavy, and you're enthusiastic. 3 knocks too many, and suddenly you're cited for public rapping of portals in an alarming manner. A passing neighbour is clutching her pearls. In Victorian England, knocking after dusk is practically an act of domestic terrorism. The trouble starts with the door itself. In Victorian London, front doors weren't the modest hollow panel affairs you might find today. These were solid slabs of oak, reinforced with enough iron to stop a charging bull and fitted with knockers the size of small kettlebells. To make any sound at all, you had to put your shoulder into it. Unfortunately, in a society where even the sound of a spoon clinking too loudly against a teacup could elicit scandalized glances, there was a fine line between politely summoning the household and launching a siege. You don't mean to cross that line. It's just that the first knock barely makes a sound, muffled by the layers of wood, paint, and social propriety. The second knock seems reasonable. The third, well, it's winter, your hands are cold, and you want to make sure your friend hears you before you freeze into a decorative ice sculpture on their stoop. By the fourth knock, however, you've triggered the Victorian neighbourhood alarm system. The curtains twitch. From across the street, Mrs. Prendergast, self-appointed guardian of local peace and amateur legal scholar, appears in her doorway, eyes wide with horror. She clutches her pearls so tightly you're surprised they don't shatter. "Excessive percussive disturbance," she hisses, as if she's just witnessed a murder. You're still trying to explain that it's just a stubborn door when the constable arrives, seemingly conjured out of the shadows. "Sir, madam," he says, "this is a clear violation of the Public Decorum and Nocturnal Peace Act." Section 8. Unnecessary wrapping of portals with intent to alarm. Here's the modern equivalent: your Uber driver calling you twice in quick succession, and your neighbour reporting it as a hostage situation. The constable demands a reconstruction of events. You're instructed to knock on the door again at the same intensity for evidentiary purposes. You comply, but this only makes things worse, Mrs. Prendergast gasps and mutters about audible vibrations felt 3 houses down. Victorian law placed a surprising emphasis on the sanctity of quiet evenings. Loud or repeated knocks could be seen as aggressive, threatening, or simply bad manners, an auditory intrusion into the domestic bubble. The belief was that proper citizens would announce themselves with one firm knock, then wait patiently for as long as it took for someone to answer, even if that meant dying of exposure in the meantime. The constable offers you 2 choices: pay a fine for unlawful knocker enthusiasm, or accompany him to the station for further discussion. You opt for the fine, which is modest in money, but colossal in humiliation. When your friend finally opens the door, having been upstairs the entire time, blissfully unaware of the escalating drama, you're halfway through explaining why you've just been legally reprimanded for visiting. They nod sympathetically, then casually mention that you could have used the tradesman's entrance around the side. From that evening forward, you approach Victorian doors with monk-like restraint. You've mastered the art of waiting in the cold, staring at the brass knocker as if it might report you to the authorities if touched again, because in Victorian England, the streets were patrolled not just by policemen, but by the unblinking ears of neighbours, and your reputation could hinge on something as small as how enthusiastically you said hello to a door. You value dental hygiene, but in 1850, brushing your teeth on the street is seen as flagrant display of foreign affectations. You lather up your brush at the water pump, and within seconds, a small crowd forms, half scandalised, half convinced you're practising witchcraft. You try to explain toothpaste. Someone calls for the vicar. It all begins innocently enough. You've been on the move all morning, darting between errands in the soot-thick air of Victorian London, and after a particularly strong cup of coffee, thick enough to hold a spoon upright, you decide your mouth could use some freshening. Unfortunately, in an age before portable bathrooms and discreet travel kits, your only option is to improvise. The public water pump seems like the perfect solution. It's free, it's outdoors, and there's a small ledge where you can balance your toothbrush. The moment you begin to swirl the bristles in the tin mug you've filled with cold pump water, you feel a prickle on the back of your neck. The market stallholders have stopped mid-haggle to stare. By the time you've worked the powdery toothpaste into a frothy foam, flavoured faintly of chalk and mint, the onlookers have doubled. To you, it's just brushing. To them, it's performance art. One gentleman, gripping his walking stick like a weapon, mutters that tooth-scraping is something best done behind closed doors, if done at all. A woman in a bonnet shields her child's eyes as though you're engaged in some act of public indecency. The general Victorian consensus seems to be that your mouth, like your ankles, should remain entirely mysterious in public. A local grocer, eager to stir the pot, suggests loudly that you might be engaged in some exotic foreign ritual. Someone else shouts for the vicar, because apparently nothing diffuses potential dental witchcraft like holy water and stern prayer. Here's the modern equivalent: pulling out floss at a bus stop and having the entire street treat you like you've performed open-heart surgery on the curb. Before you can rinse, a constable arrives, summoned by either the vicar or the rapidly snowballing gossip. He eyes the toothbrush suspiciously, as though it might be a concealed weapon. "What's this, then?" he asks. You explain, between spits, that you're cleaning your teeth, a simple matter of hygiene. But in Victorian England, the link between oral cleanliness and health isn't widely embraced by the average street-goer. Many still believe tooth pain is caused by toothworms, and the idea of brushing daily is about as common as owning a pet giraffe. The constable listens, jotting something in his notebook. Flagrant display of foreign affectations, he repeats slowly, as if tasting the words, and possible public disturbance by way of excessive foaming. You're given two options: stop immediately and be on your way, or accompany him to the magistrate for a discussion about appropriate domestic conduct. You opt to stop, though the crowd lingers, watching you pack away the toothbrush as though it might leap out and attack someone. Later, at home, you realise just how strange this must look through Victorian eyes. Brushing teeth in public is not just odd, it's suspicious. It hints that you either have scandalous personal habits, or worse, that you care too much about your appearance. Both are dangerous signals in a society that values restraint above comfort. From that day on, you brush only in the privacy of your lodgings, preferably behind a locked door, and yet, every time you pass that water pump, you remember the stares, the muttered accusations, the absurdity of nearly being fined for something that, one day, people will do twice a day without thinking, because in Victorian England, you could be arrested for napping, fined for knocking, and, apparently, accused of witchcraft for wanting clean teeth. You spot a penny farthing, tall, wobbly, impossible to look dignified upon, and can't resist a quick ride. 5 feet later, you're recklessly propelling a velocipede in a residential area. The constable chases you on foot, naturally, while you struggle to dismount with any remaining self-respect. Victorian justice is swift, and also very out of breath. It all starts with curiosity. The penny farthing, half bicycle, half ladder accident is leaning invitingly against a lamppost. Its enormous front wheel glints in the weak afternoon sun, practically whispering, "Come on, give it a go." You glance around. No one is watching except for a milk delivery boy, 2 pigeons, and fate itself. Getting on a penny farthing is the first challenge. It requires a running start, a blind leap of faith, and a willingness to momentarily sacrifice your dignity. You haul yourself up, catch the tiny step above the back wheel, and clamber onto the saddle. For a brief, shining moment, you are a Victorian titan of transport. Then physics remembers you exist. The front wheel, taller than most children, wobbles like a drunk uncle at a wedding. Your legs pedal frantically, but you have the uneasy sense that you're no longer riding the bicycle so much as being taken hostage by it. The penny farthing surges forward down the cobbled street, a path as smooth as a bag of marbles. This is when the constable spots you. His expression is one part horror, one part personal offence, as though your very act of cycling has upended the social order. In Victorian England, the penny farthing was still something of a novelty, and riding it in a residential thoroughfare could be classed as reckless endangerment, largely because any collision was likely to catapult both rider and victim into a nearby hedge. He shouts after you to dismount, but dismounting a penny farthing is less step-off gracefully and more attempt-controlled falling from the height of a second-floor window. You try to slow down, but braking technology in 1875 is rudimentary at best, more hope and prayer than mechanical engineering. Here's the modern equivalent: deciding to test drive a Formula One car through a suburban cul-de-sac, then realizing you can't reach the pedals properly. You pass a startled elderly woman carrying a basket of eggs, who leaps aside with surprising agility. 2 small boys cheer and run alongside for a few seconds before being shooed away by their mother. The cobblestones clatter under the thin metal rim of your wheel, and every bump sends you bouncing just enough to question whether your internal organs are still in the same order you started with. The constable, meanwhile, is chasing you on foot. He's surprisingly fast, though by the time you finally manage to stop, by steering into a patch of soft mud, he is wheezing like a set of malfunctioning bellows. He recites the charges between gulps of air. Recklessly propelling velocipede within limits of a peaceful neighbourhood, frightening poultry and probable egg wastage. You're ordered to pay a fine, not because of the mud-splattered end to your journey, but because of the disturbance of the Queen's peace by means of ill-advised locomotion. The penny farthing is confiscated until competent operation can be demonstrated, which you suspect is a polite way of saying never again. Walking home, you reflect on the sheer absurdity of it all. The penny farthing, for all its elegance and engravings and advertisements, is essentially a prank disguised as a mode of transport. In the right hands, it's a marvel of Victorian engineering. From that day forward, you keep to walking, unless, of course, another unattended penny farthing appears, in which case history suggests you'll climb aboard again, and the constable will start running before you've even pedalled once. You sit in Hyde Park, enjoying a scandalously modern novel with a heroine who thinks for herself. Within minutes, you're accused of corrupting public morals through literature. The book is confiscated, the park bench is declared tainted, and you're left defending the radical notion that women in fiction are allowed opinions. The morning had started so peacefully. The park was quiet except for the crunch of gravel paths and the distant hum of carriage wheels. You'd found the perfect bench beneath a sprawling elm, unwrapped your copy of The Daring Miss Worthington, and settled in for a bit of escapism. The heroine was clever, sarcastic, and most dangerously, made choices without asking a man's permission first. In your mind, this is harmless entertainment. In the mind of 1850s Victorian society, you might as well be parading through Hyde Park wearing a sandwich board that reads "Down with Decency." The trouble begins with a single cough. Not yours, but from the older gentleman on the bench opposite you. It's the kind of cough that says, "I am not ill, I am morally offended." He peers over the rim of his newspaper like you've just drawn horns on Queen Victoria in full view of the Royal Guard. Then comes Mrs. Endicott, self-proclaimed arbiter of public taste and possessor of a hat the size of a small lifeboat. She cranes her neck to glimpse the cover of your book. The sight of a young woman reading without the protective chaperoning influence of Pilgrim's Progress causes her to gasp so loudly that 3 pigeons take off in fright. You're still halfway through a particularly good chapter. Miss Worthington is about to turn down a marriage proposal, shocking everyone. When Mrs. Endicott hails a passing park warden, she whispers urgently, casting you glances like you're smuggling anarchist pamphlets. The warden approaches with the solemnity of a man about to enforce the Empire's honour. "Madam," he begins, "there are reports of questionable literature being consumed in a public place." He says literature, the way someone might say, rat infestation. You try to explain that it's just fiction. A bit of romance, a dash of social commentary, no actual instructions for dismantling the monarchy. But he's already reaching for the book. In a swift, practiced motion, it's confiscated, and you're informed that all objects of moral concern must be examined by the proper authorities. Here's the modern equivalent. Someone seeing you reading Pride and Prejudice on a bus and calling the police because the title contains the word pride. To make matters worse, the bench is officially tainted by the influence of subversive thought and roped off for the rest of the day. Passers-by glance at it with a mixture of fear and fascination, as though it might sprout radical ideas if they sit down. The warden gives you a formal warning under the Public Decency and Literature Guidelines, an umbrella term covering everything from overtly scandalous publications to anything with more than one female character who talks about something other than embroidery. Defending yourself is tricky. On one hand, you could point out that the book contains no actual indecency, unless you count a paragraph where Miss Worthington eats strawberries in a slightly unladylike fashion. On the other hand, even mentioning strawberries might cause Mrs. Endicott to faint theatrically into the nearest hedge. Eventually, you're escorted out of the park with instructions to confine your reading to the home or other suitably private venue. You walk away, clutching the receipt for your confiscated book, wondering if they plan to burn it, ban it, or simply hide it under a stack of perfectly dull gardening manuals. From that day on, you develop a strategy. Read safe, morally unimpeachable titles in public. The proper habits of genteel ferrets, perhaps, and save anything truly gripping for candlelight in your parlour. But even then, you keep the curtains drawn. Because in Victorian England, the most dangerous thing you can do isn't stealing, or loitering, or even flying a kite on a Sunday. It's daring to imagine, in full view of polite society. So tonight, as you lie there in the dark, free from the risk of arrest for reckless umbrella flourishing or improperly arrayed vegetables, take a deep breath and let yourself appreciate just how safe and outrageously legal your modern existence really is. You made it through a day in Victorian England. You navigated suspicious goats, avoided unlawful sandwiches, and somehow survived the endless parade of constables, busybodies, and inexplicably complicated hat laws. All without being dragged off for perambulation, with intent to bewilder. That's a triumph most Victorians could only dream of. It's easy to laugh at their absurd rules and the sheer inventiveness of their legal system, but beneath the layers of smog, starch, and social anxiety, there's a kind of hopeful logic. People trying to make sense of a rapidly changing world with the only tools they had: rules, routines, and an absolutely unhinged obsession with personal conduct. So tonight, as you tuck yourself into bed, no constables peering through the window, no risk of arrest for whistling after 10 p.m, and absolutely no threat of being fined for apologizing too much, maybe spare a sleepy moment of gratitude for central heating, for clean socks, and for the simple fact that you can eat a sandwich any way you want. History proves that humans have always been stubborn, resourceful, and slightly ridiculous, surviving by banding together, by making rules, and, yes, by occasionally arresting a goat just to keep things interesting. Rest well, knowing that your only crime tonight is staying up too late, listening to the soothing ramblings of an internet stranger. Sleep peacefully, and may your dreams be utterly free of suspicious loafing and excessively brimmed hats. Good night.